Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you all here in Stanborough Park Church. Last time I had the opportunity to speak to you was in June, so I'm glad to be back. And you had this amazing series with Mark Finley and trying to reach out to the community. So open your Bibles in whatever form you have it. Isn't that amazing that nowadays you can have it in digital and even so many versions on your mobile? That you could not carry it probably in a printed form. So whatever form you have the Bible, open the Holy Scriptures to the book of Acts. And there in chapter 9, from verses 1 to 9, we read about the conversion of Paul, which is the most dramatic conversion story in all of the Bible. And the reason why it's so dramatic is that Saul of Tarsus was one of the church's first and fiercest enemies, persecuting children of God and killing those who did not agree with his view of religion. In first century Judaism, there is a belief that when the Messiah comes, that will be the end of the old age. Then there will be 7-day silence, and then the new age starts. So when these early Christians say that Jesus is the Messiah has already come, Paul knows they are wrong. Because the old age still continues. People still get sick, people die. So the old age is clearly still here. Therefore, they are wrong. He was afraid that this variation is going to be a threat to Judaism, and therefore he persecutes them. But you need to know that Saul is a disconnected soul. Now you might be thinking, what do you mean by that? It might be strange to you, but you know that he kept the right day. He believed in the mortality of the soul. He followed the clean food laws. He paid the tithe. And he was waiting for the Messiah. And how do you call someone who keeps the right day, follows the right diet, pays the tithe, and waits for the Messiah? A Seventh-day Adventist. So for all practical purposes, he's a Seventh-day Adventist. Yet, he's a disconnected soul. He's on the road to Damascus, but you and I know that he's on the road to hell. Paul is not happy that the news about Jesus travels away from Jerusalem, and now it's in the neighboring country, Syria. So he wants to bring those followers back to Jerusalem. But there, something happens. He's a disconnected soul because if people don't see the truth as he sees that, he gets so upset, he gets so angry that he's willing to kill them. He demands that people change. But that's when he met God's transforming grace. Suddenly there is a light, and he hears the voice of the resurrected Christ. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And that moment he realizes he was wrong. Jesus is alive. He speaks to him. Obviously, he was resurrected. And if God resurrected him, he would not resurrect an impostor. So he must be the Messiah. And then the identification mark. Why do you persecute me? Now, Saul did not persecute Jesus. He persecuted his followers. But Jesus says, why do you persecute me? He realizes Jesus did not treat him the way he treated his followers. Who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, the one that you persecute. And that's why his response, now what shall I do? Do you know his paradigm, his way of thinking, his mindset? Now you tell me what to do, and now when I know that you are alive, I am going to make sure that everybody believes that. And if they don't, woe to them. You have a similar story in the Old Testament, in the book of Daniel, when Nebuchadnezzar is confronted in the fiery furnace with the living God, that he calls the 3 young worthies out and makes an edict, and now everybody needs to know what kind of God they serve. And if they don't, we still have the burning furnace. And so God needs to work on him in chapter 4. God needs to work on Saul. And you know what he tells him? Go to Damascus, you will be told. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not getting anywhere with a person with this mindset. All we get is dead bodies along the journey. Go to Damascus, you will find out. And suddenly a proud man needs to be led by hand by other people. There is a significant transition, a paradigm shift in his thinking, in his way of living. He is radically transformed forever. This resourceful, powerful, and proud individualist who was a persecutor of the church by the name of Saul is radically transformed to a rather helpless Paul who suddenly needs to be led around by somebody else's hand, totally dependent on others. Because Saul needs to learn that religion is primarily about connection. He needs to connect with someone else. And although this is, as I said, the most dramatic conversion story in all of the Bible, and so throughout the centuries, many people, especially those who lived in Christian families, would even doubt their own Christian conversion experience because they would say, I did not experience anything so dramatic about Saul, like Saul. There was nothing so dramatic about my experience. It was just gradual, step by step, but I can't pinpoint a specific time or day when I was a great sinner and then I became a saint. And that's why you and I, in the middle of this amazing, dramatic transformation, have another story. A story of change of a little man. A story which is easily overlooked, even though you and I heard the story of conversion of Paul countless times. It's the story of Ananias. Acts 9, verse 10. In Damascus there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision, Ananias. Now, you already know that when you read the Bible, the important thing is what theologians call the antecedent reading. How does this connect with what went before? Most people, when they read the Bible, they ask the question, so what does it say to me? Now, that's an important question, just out of place, not yet. First, we need to discover what it meant to them, what Luke wants you to realize, what connections he wants you to make. Because the first connection is not with your life, it's with the original readers. And if you know anything about the Jewish history, if you have heard about the sacrifice of Isaac in the book of Genesis, one day God called Abraham. And he said, "Yes, Lord," he answered. Exactly the same thing as when God speaks to Abraham. The Lord told him, "Go to the house of Judas on the straight street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. And this time it's not go and sacrifice your beloved son. This time just go to that street, that house, and talk to this man. Ananias can hardly believe what he hears. Lord, did you say Saul? Is it the same Saul who is the enemy of the church, number one? The persecutor and the destroyer of so many Christians? In the words of famous theologian John McEnroe, you can't be serious. You can't possibly ask me to do that. Verse 13, Lord, Ananias answered, I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. I have heard about his past. I know what he did previously. Verse 14, and he has come here with authority from the chief priests to arrest all who call on your name. And I know on what mission he is now. By the way, isn't that intriguing to realize that early Christians had good intelligence? Saul has not reached Damascus yet, and they already know that he is coming and why he is coming there. They had some mole in the system. And if you grew up in a certain period of time, you will relate to verse 15 very easily. But the Lord said to Ananias, go. Do you remember how was it when you and I grew up? If your mom said something, if your father said something, there was not much discussion. Go. Why? Because I said so. And I am your mom. I am your dad. Ananias, we are not going to discuss this. Just go. And then comes the most amazing transformation in all the Bible. Now remember, I told you that the most amazing transformation was Saul. Let me take that back. Imagine that this man goes to the straight street, finds the house, finds the enemy of the church, and addresses him not as the church enemy number one, not as a murderer and destroyer that he was, but he comes to him and says, Brother Paul, Brother Saul. He lays his hands on him, he ministers to him, and when he does so, his sight is restored, he's able to receive food, and that change was so dramatic that from now on he's not going to be called Saul, he's going to be called Paul. Now, what would happen if Ananias said, Lord, I don't mind evangelism. I support total member involvement, or how do you call it? I don't mind some new people joining our church, but a murderer? Am I supposed to wander down the straight street and risk death on the basis of one guy's religious experience? And I would not have blamed Ananias. Most probably he had friends, even close family members, who had been in prison or maybe put to death because of efforts of this Saul. He did not wish him any harm, but why should he wish him any good? And this is what Luke wants you to struggle with. who had the most dramatic conversion in this story? Was it Saul, who was converted from being the church enemy number one to a great heroic missionary to the Gentiles? The one that we know as Apostle Paul or Saint Paul? Or was it little Ananias? Ananias, who based on nothing else but God's voice and vision, is willing to risk his life, goes to the street called Straight, and addresses this once bitter enemy as a brother. He touches him, lays his hands on him, and becomes agent of the most dramatic transformation for a stranger. And that's what Luke wants you to struggle with. Listen to this. Saul had a vision. Somebody is going to come. The guy is called Ananias, and he is going to be an instrument of blessing to you. Ananias has a vision. God says to him, go, be an instrument of blessing to this Saul. And so he goes. Turn the page. Chapter 10. Peter has a vision. Go to a Roman centurion and be an instrument of blessing to him. Cornelius has a vision. Somebody's going to come, his name is Peter, and he's going to be an instrument of blessing to you. Here's the question. Who had the most dramatic conversion? Was it Cornelius? Or was it Peter? What would you expect? Oh, the pagan, of course, the apostle is okay. He preached a sermon on the day of Pentecost when he opened the door to Gentiles to come in. Actually, Peter comes to the house of Cornelius and says, I had this vision that I'm supposed to come here, but you know that it's not appropriate for me, so I took 6 witnesses because I know I will be in trouble because of this. Imagine the politically correct speech. And then he adds, and I have no idea why I am here. And you realize, actually, it's not Cornelius who has the most dramatic conversion. It's Peter. Here you have the Saul who is going to become the famous St. Paul. And you think, wow, what a transformation, what a conversion. But Luke wants you to realize, actually, it's not Saul who has the most dramatic conversion. It's Ananias. That someone can go to an enemy and say, Brother Saul, I am here to be a blessing to you. I am here to treat you differently than you treated us Christians. You want a piece of heresy this morning? God could have floored, knocked Saul off his horse a long time before. That was not the difficult part. You know what was the difficult part? To find a Christian who is going to treat Saul the way Ananias did. That was the difficult part. Imagine how Ananias must have received all this. The problem is, you and I can't. Unfortunately, we will never know. Why? Because you never hear about Ananias afterwards. He evidently went back home about his business, having played his little part in the great story. The little part, which was not that little. It was a great part in this story. If something is going to change in 21st century London, Watford, It's going to be done by small people like you and you and you and you, like Ananias, who are willing to connect to others and become a tool of God's transforming grace to people around us. And how is it possible? How come that Ananias is capable of doing it? This is why. If you have been connected to God, that means you have been forgiven. When God's Spirit poured life into you, that means other people pose no threat to your existence. Yes, they can still reject you, they can hurt you, they can make your life pretty miserable, but they cannot destroy you. Therefore, you don't need to be afraid of them. Or in other words, your fear does not need to become the controlling agent of how you treat people. If we don't connect with others, then remember, we are like Saul before Damascus, not like Ananias. And Saul has his right doctrines. He's ready to impose them on anyone who does not believe them. And that's why he's on a mission to reach Syria, but he's not on a mission to bless Syria. And that's why God needs to knock him off his horse, because that's the only language he understands. But then he needs to send Ananias to him. Saul needs to learn that religion is primarily about connecting. And Ananias, who has been transformed in a similarly radical way, is going to come and not to demand anything from Saul, but to minister to him, to become a tool of blessing to him. Saul needs to learn religion is primarily about connection. And who can symbolize this better than Ananias? Accepted and changed by God, he is able to extend his right hand of fellowship, acceptance, even to an enemy like Saul. Being God's people is primarily about right relationships. Being a community of connected people, as it is about right doctrines. If our relationships are still determined by fear or indifference, that means we are disconnected. And how do you relate when you are disconnected? You demand. You demand from others rather than care. We demand from others that they change rather than we have something to offer to them. That's why we so often demand that people study the Bible, that people witness about their faith, that people eat at least as healthfully as we do, that people keep the right day. Now, don't get me wrong, the right doctrines are surely important, but Saul had them. However, if you demand, disconnectedness can never produce connectedness, connection. If I realize that God accepted me, then I can accept you. And listen to this. I have not contributed to my acceptance. I have done nothing for God to accept me. That happened on the cross of Calvary 2,000 years ago on our behalf, for our sake, and without us. And that's why, because God accepted me the way I was, I can accept you the way you are. When people offend me or hurt me, and let me tell you, they certainly will, I can nourish that spirit of forgiveness which I already experienced from God. I may look hard for it, but it's already there, somewhere deep in my heart. And because God cared for my needs, I can care for yours. I have been forgiven And that's why I have received the task to forgive and to care. I have been accepted, and that's why I have the task to accept. So that the same transformation that changed my life can be poured into your life and transform your life. When we are converted to Christ, we are not simply converted into loving Christ. That's easy. We love because He first loved us. But when we are converted to Christ, we are commanded to love those whom Christ loves. And that's why we are commanded, because that's the difficult part. It's not difficult loving Christ. He's always reaching out, always changing lives, always bringing the lost sheep into the family. But loving those that Jesus loves, that's another challenge. Ananias have heard enough about this man Saul to know that he didn't want to have anything to do with him. And yet when he is commanded to go to a specific house, he goes. He ministers to him. He went and showed God's mercy by calling him a brother. I see you as part of the family, of God's family. And when we are willing to pour into others what has been poured into our lives, that's where the connection happens. That's where the miracle happens. Reconnection takes place. A discouraged soul begins to draw close. Courage develops. Hope appears. Life springs. And we are eager not only to receive more of the connection ourselves, but also to provide it for others. Instead of seeing Saul as the worst enemy, he can call him Brother Saul, my brother. You are part of family. There is a new sort of kinship, a new tie that Saul was not aware of before. So maybe here is the question from the story of Ananias for you and me. Are we a tool of connection to the disconnected souls? Are we able to see others as brothers and sisters? Do we see those who are different than us as a part of God's family? And we already noted that Ananias was not, as far as we know, some kind of a spectacular, exceptional Christian. Luke has these amazing speeches. The speech of Peter on the day of Pentecost, the speech of Stephen, the speeches of Paul when he relates his experience with God 3 times. But we never read about Ananias preaching, making a great speech or teaching. His name is not mentioned as the one who was close to Jesus before the resurrection or after. He's just an ordinary Christian in Damascus. But here's the thing. An ordinary Christian is capable of an extraordinary connection. And that's exactly the transformation that God is after. Jesus does not hesitate to ask ordinary people to act like Christians. Discipleship means to take ordinary, everyday people and turn them into courageous people who are able to relate to others in the same way as Jesus relates to us. Discipleship means taking ordinary, everyday people and turn them into extraordinary people who live counter to the ways of the prevailing culture, who can treat other people in the way they have been treated by God, not by other people. Discipleship means taking ordinary Christians and make them into saints. Followers of Jesus are those who do not refer to others by the world's designation as fanatic, liberal, conservative, left-wing, right-wing, and other names, which I'm not even going to mention, you know them, but capable of seeing others as Ananias saw Saul, as a brother or a sister. And let's make this utterly plain. I need to tell you, for this to happen, you don't need a degree in theology. You don't need PhD in counseling. All you need to relate to others with power that transformed your life is a fresh connection with Jesus. The connection that transformed yours. And maybe I need to also say that I do have a degree in theology, a doctoral degree, and a postgraduate certificate in counseling, yet I am not good at it. Maybe because somehow I grew up in the system that religion is primarily about the right doctrines, not the connections. Maybe somehow because the way I was conditioned, I will see you as a struggling person. But that does not create a connection. It only reinforces your worst fear that you are nothing else, just a struggler. You become afraid that nobody will see anything deeper in you, only sin and pain. And that's all there is to you, are your failures, your struggles. And in that case, your only hope for connection is to sin less, so that you feel better. But you and I know, trying hard to sin less, it never works. You can only achieve this much by trying hard. If I see you as the one who is somehow wrong, then you will try to figure out, what should I do that I don't do things which are wrong? And so the only hope for you to be accepted is stop doing things which are wrong. Start doing things which are right. But as you know, either from music or from psychology, or if you are married, from sexuology, you know, the harder you try, the worse the performance gets. You only have a concert when you don't think about, where does this finger need to go? The moment you start thinking, where does this finger go? That's it, you have finished playing. You have a concert as long as you don't think about your performance. And so God knows that. That's why He accepted us, so that we can accept others. And He expects you and me to be a person like Ananias, who models this connection for people around us. And when I say model, I don't mean I'll be nice and I promise to pray for you. I mean more than just giving you a hug and go through the motions. To model means that when I see you filled with doubt and self-hatred, when I see you and observe you in seasons of discouragement and failure, that I will be filled with anguish, with sadness. Remember, Jesus said, weep with those who weep. But I also will be filled with hope. Not an empty hope that says tried and shallow things like, don't worry, it will work out. Or just hang in there. I'm sure you will feel better soon. But a hope that is based on seeing something in you which is planted there by God. Not that you have mastered or I gave you, but because God Himself put it already inside you. So here's the conclusion. Verse 15. But the Lord said to Ananias, go, this man is my chosen instrument. This man is my chosen instrument. Yes, Saul was a chosen instrument. He just didn't know it yet. But Saul was Ananias. Ananias was God's chosen instrument. And so are you, and you, and you, and you, and you. We are God's chosen instrument. Because you are God's daughter and God's son, there is a value and life in you. You need to know you are more than sum total of your problems and failures. And when you see others struggling, you can believe that somehow, if we connect, the good will emerge. I will ache when I see that the good is buried under the bad. But I want you to know that I am passionately convinced that by the grace of God, the good is already there, put in by God, just waiting to be released, nourished, and developed. And that's why we are here, to empower other people, to nourish, develop, and release the good that God put into every created being. And because the gospel gave life to both of us, I want you to know that I want to be an instrument of blessing to you. Because Ananias became an instrument of blessing to Saul. And you can be an Ananias to someone else.